So here I'm going to talk about a really useful data source that students can use to both pull data and make their own database as well as graph data directly. It's called FRED, or Federal Reserve Economic Data. I talk about this elsewhere in my macroeconomic data analysis class, but this is really good if you're like just a principal student just starting out, just want to make a simple graph, or if you're going to use economic data in a non-economics class and you don't want to have to make your own graphs. So you can just use what's generated for you, and it's not even plagiarism because it's really cited properly. So anyway, the site is Federal Reserve Economic Data. It comes from the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank. You can see here it's got hundreds of thousands of time series or macroeconomic data, different frequencies. It could be annual, quarterly, could be monthly. Some things are daily. And it also comes from a bunch of sources. A lot of times I get lazy too and I say that I got my data from FRED. FRED actually just consolidates a whole bunch of data from a whole bunch of sources and puts it in one place. You can search it pretty easily, all right? So here's the website, fred.stlouisfed.org. A lot of times people just Google it. I've got it already here, but it'll take you to this site. All right. Now you can look for any kind of data from the U.S. and from around the world. One easy one is U.S. CPI. People have been talking about inflation lately. And if you see here, top hit is consumer price data for all urban consumers. You can see that the base year is 1982 to 84. This is probably what you've seen in class. And this is monthly data. One thing that's really important is that you don't have to take the data as is. All right, you can kind of play around with it, and I'll show you that. But this is a graph that shows CPI. And rising prices. You can see the little dip during the 2008 recession. It's got all the values listed. It's interactive in that sense. Got the recessions and stuff. With this data, if you were to copy this, you could take a screenshot, you could download it. This you could put directly in a paper for a class because it's got the source, it's got the website, it's completely labeled, and so you can use this as is. And that's a pretty useful tool if you're in your first class and you just want to use economic data without playing around with it too much. But if you don't like the fact that these are all monthly, right, you can see here, you can edit the graph, and you can do a bunch of different things with it. One thing is you could make it quarterly or twice a year or annual. Make it annual here. You could change it. One thing you could do is percent change from a year ago. In this case, if it's annual, it's going to be the same. But we know that percent changes are the same as inflation. So now we have a graph that is inflation rates. And so, again, I'm talking principles of macroeconomics. You've got the high inflation in the late 70s, early 80s, and then it gets under control. A little bit of deflation in the Great Recession and so forth. So these are all percentage changes. You could change this however you want, but you can stylize this to get more specific data that's specific to what you were looking for. Okay, so that said, if you were to move on from there, you have your data. You could copy it, put it on the paper. But in my higher level classes, I say, well, you simply don't want to just take the graph as is. You can download the data. So I tend to do it as a CSV. You could also do it as Excel. I remind students that even though you can open a CSV, in Excel, it's not the same. This is comma separated values. This is like a text file where the cells are separated literally by commas. This could be open in Word, or I use an R, different software. You never want to do a PDF or PowerPoint. You're simply going to download the data that you want. I've got it here, and when I open it up somewhere, it is going to appear. I can go to my downloads if it's not there for me. Oh, here we are. All right, I've got it here. You can see that these are monthly observations. First month of 1948, second, and so forth. So again, in a higher level class, I can make a little time series graph. You could also use it if you're going to take real values and so forth. But this could be directly opened up in other software. Okay, so that's the use of FRED. Okay, so now in my work, I use international financial statistics of the IFS. I use central banks. There's a whole lot of places you can get data. This puts it all in one place. If you see here, this is from the BLS, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. So the FRED is not generating the data. They're just simply taking it from a different source, and they're sourcing it nicely. There's other, you could look for other countries as well. So if you were to look for Mexico GDP, for example, you're going to get a whole bunch of variations of it. You can get real, nominal. You get things that use GDP. So you've got debt maybe as a percentage of GDP. Lots of different versions of the variable, but I'm going to take this one because it's right on top. And you can see this is Mexican GDP. This is from the OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So it's a different source, same kind of idea. And again, you can edit the graph. This is quarterly because GDP is usually quarterly or less. It would be annual, but you're never going to have monthly GDP. But you could turn it into percentage changes. You can make an index. You can do all sorts of things with it. You do percentage changes as well. So this is just a different data from a different source. But what you can do is you could get Mexican nominal GDP, Mexican CPI. You can make your own real GDP. The other thing that's nice about it is you can make your own variables, like consumption divided by GDP. You might need two separate Fred variables, but that's why you would want to open it up in Excel, right? But this is a good start, right? You go to Fred. You can look for pretty much anything of the hundreds of thousands of time series, choose the one you want, and then you can make a direct graph. If you don't like it, you can change it. So I make it annual, and then it looks a little bit different, but it's just converted for me. All right, and then I can either download it and use it for my own purposes, make my own graph my own way, or I could simply copy this and I'd have a nicely well-cited graph to put in my report.